Hey guys, it's Hollywood Studios here, and in today's video I'm going to be doing my 2023 rankings of every coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure, including a prediction for where I think the Flash Vertical Velocity opening in 2024 may rank at the park. Of course, these are just my opinions. This isn't the definitive list of the best rides at Great Adventure, but in this video specifically we're looking strictly at the roller coasters of the park. And first, I do want to get the bottom 4 out of the way so we can get right into the top 10, starting with number 14, which is Little Devil Coaster. This is the park's kiddie coaster. It's a Zamperla family gravity coaster. There's really not all that much to it. I do love the theme as it ties in perfectly with its neighboring coaster, Jersey Devil, as Jersey Devil took over the plot of land this ride formerly occupied, so they moved it over a little bit and themed it after the ride, which I think is pretty cool. But otherwise, pretty harmless ride, good for the kids, great kiddie coaster. Moving on to number 13, we have Harley Quinn Crazy Train. This is the park's Zero Tivoli. These rides are always a ton of fun, great family coasters. Fairly smooth, they have some good laterals, and the fact that it has such a long train makes the ride really dynamic. You can ride in the front row and ride in the back row and experience completely different forces on different parts of the ride, which also makes it a pretty re-rideable ride. Very fun family coaster, and overall just a good ride at the park. Number 12 is Skull Mountain, which is the park's indoor family coaster, and I used to have this ride ranked a lot higher, but unfortunately I really just can't have it that high anymore. Back, say, 10 years ago, even less than that, the ride used to have all kinds of sound effects, visual effects, and it was always a really, really fun ride, one of my favorite rides as a kid. But over the years, the effects have either been removed or aren't working anymore, and sometimes the light even protrudes into the building itself, so the ride isn't pitch black anymore either. So I do hope that at some point in the near future, the ride does get some TLC and get some of the effects added back, and some of the sound effects as well. But the ride still is a pretty fun family coaster. It's got a great first drop, and a really fun twister layout, but like I said, if the theming was back, I definitely think it would rank a lot higher. Moving on to number 11, we have Dark Knight, which is the park's other indoor family coaster, this one being a Wild Mouse, and this is themed after my personal favorite movie, The Dark Knight, which has great nods to the movie throughout its queue and the ride experience. Definitely one of the better themed coasters at Great Adventure. Similarly to Skull Mountain, this ride has lost some of the effects over the years. It doesn't have as many of the cool effects that it used to, but it still has much more than that of Skull Mountain, and it's still a fairly thrilling ride, one of the better Wild Mice out there, so that's why I have it ranked where I do. Now we break into the top 10, and at number 10 is probably a little surprising for some of you. It is Superman Ultimate Flight. Now, I tend to be a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to B&M flying coasters. I love rides like Tatsu and Manta, and even Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Over Georgia. But Great Adventures Superman has never really done much for me. I do love the first element of the ride, with that being the pretzel loop. The forces you experience in that element are absolutely mind-blowing, unlike anything else in the park. But having ridden other B&M flying coasters, I know that the pretzel loop can definitely be better, though it still is really good here on Superman. But the problem with Superman for me is that after that pretzel loop, the ride really doesn't do much. It's just a bunch of high bank turns, and then the one final inline twist at the end, which is a really fun element. But unlike Six Flags Over Georgia's, this doesn't really have terrain to interact with, so you're pretty much just floating over the grass field, doing a couple little turns here and there, and for me, it's not really the most thrilling experience out there, and I'm also not a huge fan of the restraints on flying coasters, but I can look past them if the ride is thrilling enough and entertaining enough. But unfortunately, Superman at Great Adventure specifically really just isn't for me. It's still a fun ride, I'll ride it every now and then, but it's definitely not one of my go-to attractions at the park. Moving on to number 9, we have Runaway Mine Train. This is the park's original coaster. It opened in 1974 with the park and has always been one of my favorites. I know a lot of people love this ride specifically for the final element of the coaster, where you drop down, go over this crazy airtime hill, and do a turn over the lake before returning into the station, and that is definitely what makes the ride. The airtime hill on the ride was never as abrupt or aggressive as it is now. It is absolutely insane. No matter what seat you sit in, you get flung up out of your seat. One of the better airtime moments in the park, actually, which is pretty crazy considering it's a 50-year-old Aero mine train. But the rest of the ride is fun too. It's a little janky, of course, because it is an old ride, but the helix is fun. It really builds up your speed, and I love the views you get of the Frontier Adventures area. Overall, it's just one of the most fun coasters at the park, a ride I love to ride as many times as I can when I go to the park on every visit. Moving on to number 8, we have the park's 4D free spin coaster, the Joker. Joker is a very mixed bag of a coaster, as is all of the coasters of this model type, because one ride can be completely different from the other ride. I've had rides on this coaster where it would probably be top 5 in the park because of how intense it was. But then I've also had rides on the coaster where it does nothing. And that's kind of the whole thing with this ride. It's completely random what kind of flips you get, what kind of spins you get. You can manipulate it a little bit by kicking your feet, but there's really not much to it. It's a pretty fun ride. I've ridden a bunch of these coasters and gotten various experiences. The one at Great Adventure I find is one of the better ones. It has more fins than the average Six Flags free spin. But overall, it is a fun ride. I do like the Joker theme. I love the color scheme. And a night ride on it is always really fun too because of the different colored spotlights it has. But overall, a fun ride at the park. Moving on to number 7, we have Medusa, which is the park's B&M floorless coaster, the first floorless coaster to ever open. And I used to have this ride ranked a lot higher. It used to be my number 4 or number 3 spot back in the day. But as of late, it really just isn't that anymore. It's still a fun ride. Though I do think that having ridden so many other B&M floorless coasters, I see that a lot of them are better than this one. This one, of course, was the first, so it's going to have one of the more generic layouts. It has the same inversions that you can expect on most B&M floorless coasters. It does have some fairly intense moments, but I do think that, of course, as it has gotten older, it has gotten the B&M rattle, so it's not necessarily the smoothest coaster anymore, but it's still a fun ride. And I do wish that the mid-course brake run wouldn't almost bring you to a dead stop, because if you had more speed through the second half, I think it would rank a little bit higher. But for me, Medusa, it is definitely a more generic ride because I've ridden so many rides like it, but still a fun ride, and I'm really glad to see that it is back to Medusa after so many years as Bizarro. Moving on to number 6, a very controversial pick is Green Lantern, the park's B&M stand-up coaster. Now, when I first rode Green Lantern back in 2016 when I was finally tall enough for it, I really did not like the ride. I thought it was incredibly uncomfortable. It really hurt my crotch, it hurt my head, it hurt my legs, it hurt everything. But as time went on, I was trying to figure out different ways to experience the ride that would make it less painful and more enjoyable, because this has a really great layout. Some of the best inversions out there on a B&M looping coaster, and some really good airtime moments, and of course snappy transitions as well. And as time has gone on, I figured out a way to enjoy stand-up coasters where you don't put as much stress on your legs and you're able to avoid some of the headbanging that comes with the ride. And I've been able to really enjoy Green Lantern for what it is. It's an extremely intense looping coaster. I gray out every single time I ride it. And the track itself is actually fairly smooth. It's been running really well lately. And there's some really awesome moments of airtime on a stand-up coaster, which is really cool. You have the drop off the mid-course brake run, and of course the first drop, which send you flying. And of course, some of the inversions like the incline loop are just awesome. So overall, Green Lantern is definitely a ride I think gets too much hate, and is a pretty fun coaster at Great Adventure. Moving into the top 5, at number 5 we have Batman the Ride, the park's B&M inverted coaster. Actually the second oldest coaster still operating at the park, opening all the way back in 1993, and it's still running fantastic. Recently it received a repaint which makes it look even better, but this is definitely one of the better Batman loopers out there. It runs super fast and intense, and it's fairly smooth too considering its age. I always gray out on every single ride I take on Batman, whether it's in the front row, the back row. This ride is very consistent. If you want a ride that's super intense, that tries to rip your legs off, this is the one. The inversions are very snappy, the turns are great, and overall it's just a great ride. Definitely one of the best cloned coasters in existence because of just how consistent and intense the ride is. Now we break into the famous top 4 of Great Adventure. Great Adventure is known for having a top 4 that rivals some of the best parks out there. The big 4 of the park are really, really great rides. And spots 2 through 4 are definitely interchangeable for me. There's times where I'll like one better than the other. It really just depends on the day. But today I'm putting number 4 as Nitro. Nitro's been running really, really well this year, as has almost every coaster at Great Adventure. I'm consistently getting amazing rides on this coaster, full of great ejector and floater airtime, some really strong positive G-forces in the helix, and overall just a really, really fun ride. It also helps that the ride received a new train this year, the D-Train, which runs very fast and the restraints are very nice and comfortable. We could be looking forward to a repaint for it. Hopefully next year they repainted the trains. But Nitro has always been a great ride, but in the recent years, especially in 2023, it's been running extremely well. And the reason it's not higher is because the other rides on this list have also been running extremely well this year. So Nitro has some stiff competition, but there's definitely an argument to be made for Nitro to be at the top of the 4 through 2 bracket of the coasters at Great Adventure, but I do prefer the other two coasters above it just ever so slightly. Moving on to number 3, we have Jersey Devil, which is currently the newest coaster to open at the park, opened in 2021, is an RMC Raptor, and it is a great ride. It has one of the best first drops in the world, some great moments of snappiness, airtime, whip. It is a really, really great ride. Of course, it is a bit of a temperamental ride where if you ride it in the morning, it's really not going to be anywhere near as good as it is when you ride it at night or in mid-afternoon when it had time to warm up. And overall, it is a really, really fun ride. I know a lot of people give it hate for the slowness and, of course, the layout itself not necessarily being as good as some people expected. But I think for what it is definitely one of the better coasters at the park, one of the best out there, and is definitely a really fun RMC coaster. Moving on to number 2, we have the tallest coaster in the park, tallest coaster in the world, King Ka. This ride is always a huge adrenaline rush. It has especially been running really well this year, where it's much smoother than past years. It launches you at 128 miles per hour, and if you're in the front row, or even rows 2 or 3, you really feel the wind. And if you're in any other row, you really feel the pull of that launch. It's a very intense launch. And the best is when you get to ride it when it first opens for the day, because they run it in what is called boost mode, where for the first few cycles, it's running much faster than it normally does. So when you get a ride on it during that time, when you go over the top hat, you get absolutely ejected out of your seat. Some of the strongest airtime out there because you just fly over such a tight apex. It is absolutely amazing. The views you get from up there are great. And even that last floater hill keeps you sustained out of your seat, floating the whole way through. King Ka is just such an adrenaline rush and definitely one of the best coasters at the park. But it is not the best, as number 1, as I'm sure you all saw coming, is El Toro. This ride has consistently been one of the best coasters ever built, has some of, if not the greatest ejector airtime moments ever created. The first drop followed by the 2 camelbacks are simply legendary. The way they throw you out of your seat is unreal. The turnaround provides really strong positive G-forces, as well as a nice pop of floater airtime at the top of it. Of course, the middle has always been a bit of a drag. Sometimes it just doesn't really do much, though I do think the floater hills are a nice touch to an otherwise really extreme ride. Kind of gives you time to brace yourself for the final part of the ride with the Rolling Thunder Hill, some of the strongest airtime ever built right there on that hill, and of course the crazy twister section, which when the ride is running fast really whips you around fast. I know a lot of people do complain that the ride is rough, but I think considering all other wooden coasters out there, it's really not that rough. Of course, it does have its fair share of rough patches and jackhammering, but I think all wooden coasters shouldn't be glass smooth. They should have a bit of a bite, and El Toro certainly does. But with that being said, that's my conclusive ranking for 2023 at Great Adventure. Now, as I promised at the beginning of the video, I am going to be predicting where the Flash Vertical Velocity will rank at the park. Of course, this is just a prediction. Nobody has ridden the coaster yet, and I highly doubt many people watching this video have ridden its clone, Cloud Shuttle, in China, so it is definitely a shot in the dark. I haven't even ridden a new gen Vekoma, so I'm not sure how the rides feel, but looking at the layout, I can get a pretty good sense of how it will track, how it will ride, and it definitely looks like it'll be one of the better coasters at the park. Personally, I could see it ranking around number 5 at the park, just over Batman the Ride, but not quite getting to the big 4, though I don't think it's out of the question for it to go higher depending on what we experience when we ride it. Definitely looks like a really, really good ride. It fills a gap in the park, and I can't wait to ride Flash Vertical Velocity, and I hope to see you all there next year in 2024. With that being said, that's going to conclude today's video. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, guys.